I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending January the 4th, where we've got a new year, we've got a New Year's lookout here, and it seems to be on the positive side, and we found some support from outside the industry, which we don't see that very often, and it come from somebody that's pretty well respected and pulls a little bit of weight. But late last week had an article come out in Barron's magazine, which is pretty well respected. It's published by Dow Jones and Company out of New York City, and investors look at it, read it cover to cover every week, and people that are managing money, have money to invest, but probably don't really know the ins and outs of the commodity market, especially the cattle market. But a pretty sizable article in there about the cattle market, and very positive on the outlook, calling for cattle futures on the CME to be up as much as 15%. And I tell you what, an article like that draws a lot of attention. And then they did list some things, reasons why they thought it would be higher. Of course, they don't get very specific, and they're on a kind of a worldwide platform more than just getting down to certain areas like we do here. But they had three main reasons for that. The swine flu in China. Of course, we've talked about that and have talked about it a lot in the past. Weather patterns, we've gotten into a cycle that they think is going to be a colder type cycle for the next several years, going up into like 2022 to 2024, something like that. And knowing that that's going to, if it comes to pass, pull weights down a little bit, and maybe cause people to eat more protein also. And then also world production, not just U.S. production, but a decrease in world production of beef. And I tell you what, something like that, it can be a real good shot in the arm. And I would go as far as to say that early this week we should see some positive reaction from that article in your cattle futures, as some of your money managers may not have been thinking about cattle, or may have had a pessimistic view of cattle commodities, but they might get in there. But it's caused quite a stir around several different places, sizable places of order buying and things like that, and people kind of raising an eyebrow and thinking that maybe this year could be more positive than what we might have been thinking. But for those big investors, money managers, and outfits like they have in New York City, you know, they're not going to be watching me, or they're not going to be reading many market reports. But when an article comes out in Barron's magazine, they'll take an eye at a look at that, and it might cause them to at least do some further investigation of maybe investing in that. And Lord knows we need outside investors to take long positions in the cattle futures, because our industry puts so much short pressure on that due to hedging that we just can't find enough people to go on the long side. But let's look at the board for last week. February live cattle futures, Monday was up 72 cents. Tuesday, of course, closed for the holiday, but then we had pressure come on. Wednesday was down 35, Thursday was down 30, Friday down $1.30, with February futures ending the week at 121.92. That was down just 78 cents from before Christmas, the Friday before Christmas, the two-week break there, which the markets moved around a little bit, but February only losing 78 cents in that 2-week period. April live cattle futures ended this past week at 124 even. That was down 82 cents from 2 weeks ago. And you look at that big drop off to June is $8.50 now, as we go off to try to hedge something off of June there. And that's why we've seen some pressure on these feeder calves, that and the fact that there's a ton of them. But January feeder cattle futures, Monday was down 22 cents, Tuesday closed, Wednesday down 90, Thursday down $1.42, Friday down 162. So just a downer, and our cash feeder cattle actually held up fairly well considering all that down pressure on the board there during your New Year's week. But that 144.90 to end the week was $2.45 lower than before Christmas. March ended at 142.82, down $2.70 from then before Christmas. Your fat cattle trade through Thursday, we had seen 50,700 head sell in your 5-area feeding region, mostly all in the southern plains. We don't usually see the southern plains trade before the northern plains, but we did this past week, and it was a little bit unusual how southern plains actually give up on Thursday at 123 when we saw some pretty good signs that they may be able to gain $1, and I think the lower futures from mid to late week probably spurred that trade on a little more. On Thursday when they did trade, there was actually a window when it was down more than where it closed that we were back to a positive basis, and so people jumped on that. And then Friday, of course, it dropped a bunch more, and now we're solidly in a positive basis. But we did see trade at 123 in the southern plains on Thursday afternoon, and that was pretty significant. So everybody sold there in Kansas and Texas and the Oklahoma Panhandle and all your southern plains markets. Now the northern plains had yet to trade and didn't trade till later on Friday. We did see them sell a little bit on Thursday at 123 and 195, but then when the board was down hard on Friday, they ended up trading the bulk of the live cattle sales in the northern plains at 122.5, and some more of that dress trade at 195. But they think maybe 20,000 head sold that way, and that would get us up well into the 70,000 head volume for your 5-area feeding region for the week, and probably going to be more than that, but somewhere between 75,000 and 100 there. But pretty good movement for a New Year's week. Box beef cutout values, your average trade for last week on choice cuts, $215.75, actually up 62 cents from the previous week's average. Selects, $209.65, up $220. Now we've got that choice select spread at $6.10, and a decent movement for a holiday week at 474 loads. Slaughter was 520,000 last week. Be nice to get back to a normal full week's business to see if they're going to keep their foot on the pedal of this slaughter, or they're going to back off a little bit. But 520 was 25,000 less than the same New Year's week before, but the days didn't land just the right as they did this week. So be nice to find out where we're going to be on our slaughter coming up this week. But you look at your feeder cattle markets. We know that our feeder calves and what few mostly backgrounded yearlings that are out there, but not many true yearlings around, we're a little depressed because of your lot conditions, and more than anything, it's the warm temperatures up in the northern plains there. Normally you've got a pretty day in Nebraska and Iowa would be around 30 degrees. Well, we've seen 50 degrees and up to 60 degrees, which guys are enjoying it, but it just makes these lots so sloppy because of that frozen moisture that fell over the past several weeks. It doesn't get warm enough to really dry things out. It just causes everything to get sloppy, and it's tough to get around, and makes it miserable. The cattle are pulling mud, and you're stuck all the time, and that probably has affected the market more than anything over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But we've got a lot of sellers yet. Remember, we're selling a big calf crop, and we've got a lot of sellers left, and still haven't seen enough buyers to really come into the market. We're starting to see more than anything buying for grass, for spring grass, and we're seeing a lot of that on your 4 and 5 weight steer calves, especially. Seeing guys coming in going to buy those cattle probably for turnout in the Flint Hills or one of your major grazing areas, and then they'll just kind of dry winter those calves and just keep them alive and try not to get them too fleshy until it's time for early spring turnout, and then they'll have those cattle ready to go and hit the ground running. But if you look at your real-time index on Cattle Market Central, It ended the week last week at 144.72, and that's based on the average between 700 and 900 pound steers on a 7-day moving average up through the middle 12 states, just like your CME index. And that was 75 cents lower than before Christmas. So I haven't lost that much ground. But largely in your auctions last week, your lighter weight calves and a lot of long time weaned calves now, which is helping the market on those light calves. A lot of them are 60 days weaned. They used to say they wanted them 45 days. Now they want them 60 days weaned. But those cattle, pretty much anywhere you go, even out east, have been in some really cold weather. They've had snow on their backs. They've standed a storm or two, and if they're still around kicking and looking pretty good and long time weaned, then they're not foolproof like a yearling, but their guys have a lot more confidence in the health on those and their ability to take off. The problem you see now more than anything is calves that are too fleshy, and people have been supplementally feeding them too much, and it hasn't been cold enough to keep that extra flesh sucked off of them, and now you got a lot of calves coming in that are really too fat, and nobody wants to buy fat unless you're a fat cattle buyer. If you're buying feeder cattle or grazing cattle or something like that, you'd rather just buy the running gears and not have to buy all that extra flesh. But basically, your feeder cattle and calves under 700 pounds sold a lot better last week. $2 to $5 higher. There was spots sharply higher, mostly just on your big long string reputation ranch calves in Nebraska and places like that. You see some farmer feeders and guys that buy those same calves or try to buy them every year. They know what they'll do, and they really don't have a stopping point on them. So you see that the prices on some of those just go sky high. But for the most part, your lighter weight calves sold better, and then your bigger calves and short yearlings and what few backgrounded yearlings you had out there weighing over 700 pounds were $2 to $4 lower, but sure lower on those. And one of the main reasons, if you've got a 700 pound or bigger calf, it's not really that much sought after by your feeders. They don't want to buy calves that big, but that's what we have to feed right now, and most of your lots are so muddy and sloppy, they're not going to push hard on a giant calf like that, and they've just backed off of them, and that's why you see your index levels backing off, and your prices in your sale barn sure $2 to $4 lower for last week in your sales. But let's look at some individual quotes that come out of some of your markets late last week. Let's talk about a market I don't know that we've ever talked about before. Farmers Regional Livestock Market in Glasgow, Kentucky. Had a big feeder cattle auction on Friday, and come through Cattle Market Central there. Look at these load lots of steers, feeder steers weighing from 700 to 850 pounds. I'll tell you what, in Glasgow, Kentucky, load lots of cattle. If you don't like the price of cattle in the central part of the U.S. or in the plains or in the Midwest, look at some of these. Figure out what your freight is on them. But I tell you what, they'll be as foolproof as anything, and a lot greener than anything that you get in the central part of the United States. But 700 to 850 pound load lots of steers, Glasgow, Kentucky, from 136 to 143 1/4. Now let's look at one of your premium markets up in the northern plains in Nebraska. Crawford, Nebraska had a heck of a sale on Friday. Around 6,000 head of cattle there, and just similar type prices we see at some of our premium sale barn markets in Nebraska there. But you look at this market report on steers out of Crawford on Friday there, out of Cattle Market Central. Look at your best tested weights there. 720 head of 5-weight steer calves, average 557 at 174.43. Almost 1,250 head of 6-weight steer calves there in Crawford, average 648 at 161.36 on the weighted average. And then on your bigger steer calves, 926 head of them, weighed in the 7s, averaging 734 at 152.22 on the average. That's very, very impressive for an impressive market there in Crawford, Nebraska. An individual quote that topped everything pretty much on Friday was St. Onge, South Dakota. St. Onge Livestock had 170 head string of 723 pound steers at 156.50. And that's, look at your markets from last week from a Home DV auction office here in Canyon, Texas. We'll talk to you next week.